The Dior stage at Paris Fashion Week was prepared with maximum protocol. No celebrity reception, no special guest announcements. But just 1 second after Park Jimin appeared at the end of the catwalk, the entire structure of the event changed. Dior was no longer the main focus. The camera spotlight, the audience's concentration, and global attention shifted entirely. Without warning, Paris Fashion Week belonged to Jimin, and Army Point one step of his was enough to shift the narrative from fashion exclusivity to pop culture geopolitics. No visual effects, no introduction. Yet the response was instant and brutal. In that very second, the hashtag #JiminDiorParis broke into the top ranks of global trends. Within minutes, the video of Jimin's silent appearance, without striking expressions, without excessive interaction, became the most shared fashion content worldwide. Dior's move to place Jimin as the main model was not just an artistic decision. It was a strategic maneuver that reshaped the role of Asian celebrities in European high fashion. As a BTS member in a career and military service transition, Jimin's presence in Paris, not in Seoul, not in New York, raised serious questions in international fashion media rooms. Why did Dior take such a risk, and why Jimin? There was no official announcement, no teaser publication, just a sudden appearance, followed by an irreversible impact. Jimin wore a long Dior coat from the 2025 collection, part of the experimental Renaissance Mécanique line that had never been shown before. Its geometric structure was extreme, monochrome color, no ornaments. Yet when worn by Jimin, the clothing was no longer a visual object. It became a narrative articulation. Industry analysts call this not just a fashion appearance, but a shift in the landscape of Asian celebrity representation in the global industry. In Dior's history, there had never been an Asian male figure placed as the main closer on the Paris stage. The fact that this was done not by an actor, not by a professional model, but by a K-pop singer, made this decision an open statement that the traditional hierarchy in haute couture has structurally changed. Jimin didn't smile, didn't wave. He gave no signs of interaction usually associated with fan service. All he did was walk. Yet the visual and emotional effect exceeded the entire segments of the previous collection. When he stopped at the center of the runway and looked at the main camera, there was no sentimental expression. But the whole room experienced an atmospheric pressure that was hard to explain. The only sound heard after his final step was the explosion of camera shutters from professional photographers who knew they were witnessing a moment that would not return. This move was not impulsive. Information from industry sources revealed that negotiations between Dior's creative team and Jimin had been taking place privately since the beginning of the year. His appearance agenda was locked in secret production codes to prevent leaks. Even some internal Dior staff in Paris didn't know who the closing model was until a few minutes before the show started. Security was heightened, backstage sterilized. Jimin arrived via private access, without passing through media. In every aspect, this was a visual communication operation designed for one purpose: maximum impact and choreography. No personal background music. Yet Jimin managed to manipulate the tempo of the stage with presence alone. His appearance became a live study of how minimalist gestures can convey complex messages. In European fashion journalists' notes, that moment was seen as the quietest yet most disruptive debut of the past decade. What's more intriguing is Jimin's position within BTS. In recent months, industry attention had leaned toward Jungkook, his bandmate, who had built a significant track record in Louis Vuitton campaigns. Jimin's involvement in Dior was initially perceived as a passive response. But what happened in Paris showed otherwise. This was not a response. This was a full repositioning. Dior did not make Jimin an addition. He was the center. Also present in the front row, without media statements, was Jungkook. Wearing a black suit with a small Dior brooch on his collar, he showed no emotion. But cameras caught eye contact between the two.
No dialogue, no dramatic gestures.
But enough to trigger analysis that there was symbolic coordination behind the moment. No explicit competition. What existed was a distribution of roles in a larger collective strategy. Popular culture observers refer to this as a new articulation of silent solidarity. While Western media tried to find a narrative of conflict, the facts on the ground showed the opposite. Jimin's moment on the runway was not just a personal event. It was a silent declaration that BTS's expansion into the elite sectors of global culture would not occur through scandal, but through precision, control, and symbolism. It's worth noting that Dior did not rely on excessive visualism in the collection Jimin wore.
No bright colors.
No large prints. The structure of the clothing was highly technical and difficult to wear. But on Jimin, that complexity unraveled naturally. He didn't showcase style. He showcased tension, and in fashion, visual tension is the highest form of power. Some critics questioned the long-term impact of this move. Some believed that such selective exposure could create imbalances in public perception of other BTS members. But data showed the opposite. Jimin's appearance at Dior actually increased search traffic for BTS as a whole within 48 hours after the event. The ARMY community's reaction was not exclusive to the individual, but was a collective form of support for shared achievement. Thus, Jimin's appearance didn't just alter the structure of this year's Paris Fashion Week. He disrupted the system. He redefined the role of Asian celebrities in European fashion. And most importantly, he affirmed that silence is not a passive form. On a stage full of visual efforts and gimmicky narratives, Jimin's presence proved that the greatest power in public communication is total control over silence. When the show ended, global media no longer talked about the collection. They talked about Jimin, not as an idol, not as a singer, but as the new axis of Asian cultural representation in the realm of global high fashion. Dior utilized this not merely for sales or attention, but to position itself as an institution that understands the future. Cross-ethnic, cross-disciplinary, and cross-linguistic, the world did not cheer. The world fell silent. And in that silence, Jimin claimed his stage. Dior's decision to feature Jimin at the climax of Paris Fashion Week was not just a form of visual collaboration, but a strategic declaration on the direction of the global fashion industry. In the context of visual politics and cultural representation, the emergence of an Asian figure as the center of a historic French fashion house signals a serious shift in the system of influence distribution. Jimin is not merely the face of a product. He is the narrative medium of what is happening and what will happen. In an industry long dominated by Euro-American faces, nothing was prepared conventionally for the appearance. The lighting design was revised only a few hours before the show began after the final decision that Jimin would be the main figure. Background music was cut in the final minutes. All production devices were directed to create an empty space. This was not a technical void, but a symbolic space. Dior wanted the public to face Jimin's presence without added layers. Such a decision is rarely made by major fashion houses and almost never directed at non-French native figures. When Jimin stepped onto the runway, the technical execution was nearly perfect. No sound but the tap of shoes on dark matte flooring. No additional sound effects. Even the spotlight only followed his movement with constant intensity. No increase, no decrease. Dior appeared to avoid all forms of romanticization of Jimin's figure. This was not glorification, but an objective acknowledgement of his capacity as a visual icon that required no aesthetic concealment. The response from the professional sector was measured but significant. Several creative directors of other fashion houses who attended in person were reportedly reviewing their celebrity marketing agendas after the show. Within the industry, what Dior did that night was not only innovative, but symbolically aggressive. Jimin was positioned as a convergence of two worlds that had never fully aligned, the world of Korean pop and French haute couture. It's important to note that Dior did not merely present Jimin as a regional ambassador, as many brands do with other Asian figures. He was not made the face of the Asia-Pacific campaign. He was made the face of the global collection, debuted for the first time in Paris, not in Seoul or Tokyo. This means the fashion house was not adjusting the market, but adjusting their internal artistic identity to accommodate the narrative Jimin carried. The Renaissance Mécanique collection worn by Jimin itself was the result of over 8 months of curation, involving architects and textile engineers in its development. The suit he wore that night contained lightweight metal inserts in the shoulder area, and the fabric structure consisted of top-tier European wool channeled through a micro-cooling system, a technology uncommon in fashion. Yet the focus remained on Jimin, not the technology. This is the highest achievement of design, creating grandeur while keeping the human body as the focal point. The previously described event, regarding Park Jimin's appearance at the Paris Fashion Week with Dior, deserves attention not merely as an aesthetic moment, but as a visual political event that challenges the boundaries of representation, symbolic power, and the construction of media discourse. However, before swallowing this narrative whole, the public must raise one fundamental question. Did this really happen? Or is it merely a narrative fabrication designed for sensationalism and the attention economy? Undeniably, the description of Jimin's appearance, portrayed as disruptive, revolutionary, and silently earth-shaking, is deeply alluring. But precisely because this narrative is so perfect, so cinematic in its construction, we must remain skeptical. Who constructed this information? What is the motive behind its delivery? And most importantly, are we reading a factual report or fiction with a journalistic structure? Social media platforms such as TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube, the primary sources of many visual claims and testimonies in this case, have proven to be arenas where reality and illusion often lack clear boundaries. In such an ecosystem, visuals are no longer evidence, but tools of meaning production. So, when you watch the video of Jimin's silent appearance at Dior, are you truly witnessing reality? Or are you witnessing a performance designed to appear as reality? Dior, as a French fashion house with decades of legacy, surely had strong reasons for placing a K-pop singer as its central figure. But was the decision purely strategic, or is it just a new form of cultural tokenism wrapped in the narrative of global inclusivity? Are we witnessing a structural shift in European fashion, or merely the illusion of power transfer still controlled by old players in new packaging? Why was there no official announcement from Dior regarding Jimin's involvement prior to the show, when such a strategy contradicts the conventions of global fashion promotion? If it's true that Dior's own internal team was unaware of Jimin closing the show until the final minutes, does this reflect an ultra-secret revolutionary plan, or just a cleverly crafted marketing scenario designed to appear mysterious and exclusive? And furthermore, how do we explain the intense psychological and emotional effects claimed to have been triggered by Jimin's single silent step on the runway? Is this a reflection of a global cultural icon's true influence? Or is it evidence that the modern audience has become so accustomed to visual stimulation that stillness is perceived as extraordinary presence, even when nothing of substance has actually occurred? The public, especially ARMY and pop culture observers, must question whether this narrative is being used to create a new mythological figure within the global industry map. Is Jimin truly a symbol of cultural power shift? Or is the media merely in need of a new narrative to remain relevant amidst audience fatigue with conventional marketing strategies? Claims regarding the Dior suit worn by Jimin, supposedly featuring micro-cooling technology and lightweight metal inserts in the shoulders. Are these details verified by textile experts? Or are they hyperbolic narratives designed to add a layer of science fiction to the fashion stage? Also consider the depiction of the eye-contact moment between Jimin and Jungkook in the front row. No words, no gestures. Yet public interpretation immediately leaped to complex strategic speculations. The question is, are we as viewers still able to distinguish between visual fact and interpretive illusion? Or are we simply seeing what we want to see? In this context, the Jimin Dior Paris phenomenon is not merely a one-off event, but a case study of how information, perception, and collective identity are systematically shaped in a digital society. When a narrative so quickly reaches the peak of global trending without independently verifiable evidence, we're no longer facing just a fashion issue, but an architecture of hoaxes that has reached high aesthetic levels. Therefore, the public needs to ask, who controls the flow of this information? What are the economic and political interests behind its virality? Why has this narrative developed in such precision, as if scripted by a filmmaker, not a journalist? And most importantly, what are the consequences for the collective perception of Asian representation on the global cultural stage if this information is proven to be fabricated? As a conclusion, we invite you, the readers, to not only admire this story emotionally, but also analyze it intellectually. Do not become passive spectators who accept all information as absolute truth. Use your reason. Use skepticism. Use your doubt as a form of defense against increasingly subtle symbolic manipulation. Did Jimin truly conquer Paris that night? Or are we all simply involved in a global performance scripted by algorithms, staged by celebrities, and distributed by collective hope for a change that may not be real? Think again.
Question again.
Don't let the silence deceive you. We have just followed a narrative that appears whole, profound, and stirring. Park Jimin, with his silent steps on the Dior Runway, supposedly shook the old system of the European fashion industry. However, in an atmosphere full of praise and hyperbole, we must ask again, is this a true moment of transformation, or just an empty representation commodified for image gain? Every layer of this event must be dissected with a sharp analytical blade. It is not enough to absorb visuals. We must examine the narrative logic, production trail, and strategic silence that serves as the main weapon in this scenario. When Jimin said nothing, when there was no music, no expression, that's precisely when the public was guided to assign its own meaning. And the meaning produced is a collective result of perfectionist illusion that, sadly, might be nothing more than modern visual fabrication. Do you realize that silence can be the most manipulative method of communication? The global fashion industry is never free from economic motives. Therefore, we must examine, was Jimin's selection to close Dior a purely artistic decision, or a market calculation to secure the East Asian demographic that has dominated luxury fashion consumption over the last decade? Sales statistics show that China, South Korea, and Japan contribute more than 40% of the global luxury fashion consumer base. In this context, Jimin's silence might not be a revolution. It could very well be just a new form of market acquisition strategy and intellectual packaging. Isn't it strange that this system rebellion occurred on the most established stage of the system itself? Dior is not an independent fashion house desperate for innovation to survive. Dior is an institution. So why would such a powerful institution sacrifice its long-held visual formula for a pop idol who didn't even explicitly display the product? Perhaps the answer lies not in Jimin's value as an individual, but in Jimin's value as a narrative vessel, a symbolic container in which the public pours fantasies, representations, and hopes. And when an individual becomes such a vessel, he loses autonomy. He becomes the battleground between image, discourse, and commodity. Are we admiring Jimin, or are we worshipping our own reflection as mirrored through Jimin? Many fans claim that Jimin does not need expression to convey power. But in the world of visual communication, the absence of expression is actually the most extreme form of character construction. The less you do, the more people will believe. So when Jimin simply walks, does not smile, and offers no fan service, that is when the public begins to craft its own narrative, a mass projection process that is hard to control, yet extremely profitable for the narrative producers. Then arises the more disturbing question: who truly controls the direction of this narrative? Does Jimin as an individual have an active role in shaping it? Or is he merely following a script written by agencies, fashion houses, and social media algorithms? If it's true that Dior's internal staff didn't know about Jimin's presence until the last minute, is that sophisticated secrecy, or just an illusion tactic to create dramatic effect? How likely is it that this entire sequence was precisely calculated from the beginning, including the silence, including the coincidence, including the wordless solidarity narrative between Jimin and Jungkook. The fact that we only know about this event through viral video snippets, selective testimonies, and emotional social media narratives, not from official reports or open interviews, requires us to stay vigilant. In the post-truth era, emotion replaces verification, and visual narratives like this are especially vulnerable to being used to bolster aesthetic hoaxes, lies that look beautiful. Let's examine this epistemologically. Where is the primary source of this event? Is there any confirmation from Dior's creative director publicly, who released the first footage? Why has not a single major fashion media like Vogue, Boaf, or WWD uploaded an exclusive interview with Jimin after this appearance? Without answers to these questions, the public has only one thing: belief. And in the modern capitalist system, belief is the most easily manipulated currency. Are you sure that what you saw is reality, or just the first layer of visual propaganda curated with algorithmic precision? We must consider another possibility, that this entire moment was never intended as a real event, but rather as a simulacrum, a representation of something that never truly existed, yet believed to be real because it appears convincing. Jean Baudrillard has warned that in a hyperreality world, representation can replace existence. And perhaps Jimin at Dior is one of the most recent examples of this phenomenon.